Welcome, everyone, to Cathedral Conversations. This is Dean Leander Harding at the Cathedral of All Saints. And this is a program that we have on the Cathedral YouTube channel where we have conversations that we think will be informative and inspiring with great Christian teachers. And we're thrilled to have with us today Canon Bruce Griffith, who is we'll let him tell us a little bit about his life, but among other things, he's a scholar of the Oxford movement, and those that know the Cathedral of All Saints know that its history is deeply rooted in the history of the Oxford movement and the Anglo-Catholic movement in this country. Canon Griffith is the author, along with Jason Radcliffe, of a book called Grace and Incarnation, which is about the Oxford movement, one of the best books I've read on it. I think the best book on the theology of the Oxford movement that I've read. And so we're just very excited to have him with us today and have this conversation. Father, we will always begin these things with asking people to tell us a little bit about their journey. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became a priest, and then how you became a scholar interested in the Oxford movement?
I'm going to give you more than a little background, and that's only because it feeds or things that will be said later. And so let's see, what is it? Well, I was born and raised in Minnesota, of all the sorts of places one might not imagine someone in the Oxford movement coming from. Minnesota might well be one of those. But at any rate, that's all right because I wasn't raised in the Episcopal Church either, which is good because there was no Episcopal Church near where I was raised. No, at any rate, in a small town about 65 or 70 miles north of Minneapolis. My background in all of that is that my mother was she would never say that she was the church organist at the Methodist Church. She wouldn't say that because she thought that she wasn't good enough. But in fact, she was, for all intents and purposes, the usual organist at the Methodist Church. I was raised in an all-Methodist family. My father was Methodist, came from a Methodist background as well. However, my father had no ear, as it were, for music at all. So he always went to the 8 o'clock, and she always played at the 10:30. And so I don't believe I remember them ever going to church together. But at any rate, it was nonetheless the same church. And I had one brother, 9 years my senior, no longer living. And he too was raised in that same Methodist church. It was just a very, very usual sort of northern geographically northern, I'm trying to say, situation. We were about 60 miles, I think, east of St. John's Collegeville.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, which was
Great
not
Benedictine monastery there.
Oh, yes, which was not the kind of place it was when they finished the new building. And the last time I was there, probably 5 or 10 years ago, Michael Sniffen and a group of us went out for a conference at St. John's. And Minnesota is primarily, in its southern third, a conservative Protestant place, and in its northern 2/3, a conservative Roman Catholic place, but somewhat tempered by even more conservative Lutherans. So it was that's the Midwest. I guess that's the way to say it. That was the Midwest. We left that little community of Mora, Minnesota, for a year or two up on the Iron Range, Minnesota. You may or may not remember that Minnesota produced more iron ore than anywhere else in the United States through the whole of World War II. So it was really a big industry. And my father took a job as the town engineer for the community where the biggest part of that was. And after about 2 years of that, he became the city engineer for a part of Mankato, Minnesota, which is south of Minneapolis, about 90 miles, and was then the third, fourth or fifth largest community in the state. So that's this kind of, that's where I went to high school. Uh, uh, I might as well add, to make sense of some things I'll say later, one other thing about that, which is that's also where I quit high school. After grade 11, I left there to go to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque.
Wow.
So, well, you got to get around somehow.
Yeah.
So you might as well quit school to do it.
Yeah.
Now, excuse me for just a bit of coffee.
Yeah. We have that in common. I only had 3 years of high school as well.
Good. Good.
Yeah, I think they had enough of me after that, I think.
Yeah. And in my case, going to New Mexico was about the School of Opera.
Ah,
Because with the Santa Fe Opera there, the University of New Mexico has had quite an extensive school of opera, including a full.
you were a singer.
Yes, I was a singer, which is part of how I got into the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, that's a well-trodden path.
Well, that's right. And I said, people ask me, what brought you into the Episcopal Church? And I said, they paid me.
Yeah, yeah.
Needed the money.
Best senior warden I ever had used to say that he started out as a mercenary because he sang in a boys' choir, and that was a congregationalist that was paid to be in a boys' choir.
That's right. That's us.
Yeah.
So, but at any rate, I only stayed in New Mexico for a year. I really didn't like New Mexico, and I discovered that probably opera was not my future. And it wasn't a musical decision exactly. And it is at that point, or somewhere along in that year, that I had an actual religious experience. And it was very calm, very subtle. I was walking along alone across the university campus on my way to a music history course. And suddenly it was as if, and I'm not saying it really was, it was as if someone spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally a call.
Mm-hmm.
Simply said, you will serve me.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Mm. But it never quite went away.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of hung there.
Yeah.
And so I didn't automatically interpret it in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I went on to music history class. What did you do this morning? I spoke with God, and I went to music history. More difficult, music history. So, but at the end of that year, I left the University of New Mexico and came back to Minnesota to a small Methodist university, which had 3 generations of my family go through it. Mm-hmm. Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, these are just the pieces that come together kind of oddly. When I got there, I was very soon offered a position as the tenor leader in a choir of an Episcopal church in St. Paul. And that choir had just had Larry King come as he was coming back from Cambridge. Coming back, he was just taking a short job in that parish on his way to finding something quite a bit larger, which was a large job in San Diego, where he was for many years before he went to Trinity Wall Street. So it was just so I accidentally fell into a kind of Anglican choral universe.
It's a pretty world to be in.
That was a good world for me. It was a perfect world for me. And I stayed there um, through my college career. Graduated in 1965. Yes. And by then, I had really come to understand what kind of experience I had when I was a freshman in college, and had thought that maybe ordination was somewhere in my future.
Mm-hmm.
So my rector suggested that I go, and it suggested that I might try going to seminary, that I should, but I needed to go. I need to see the bishop at the diocese. I need to see the commission, now called Commission on Ministry, all the steps.
Right.
I went through the steps. Meanwhile, someone said, somewhere along the line asked, "Have you been to a conference about this?" And I said, "No." Oh, and then the bishop said to me, "Well, I want you to go to Seabury Western, where there's a conference for possible ordinands. And there'll be one in sometime in the middle of the year."
Seabury Western is not quite sure how it exists now. I think it exists as a house of studies, but it was a really great seminary in its day, right across the street from Northwestern University.
Yes, yeah. And I have relatives.
Beautiful campus. I mean, just a spectacular seminary campus.
I went there, and it was very nice, very fun. But by this point, I had also upped my interest in archaeology. When all this comes together, it really does have some unity here. I apologize for taking so much of your time.
It's okay. We're fascinated.
It all comes together all of a sudden in that I went to this conference at Northwestern. I had the summer previous to that been a summer student in the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem.
Wow.
So that under the direction of the great Kathleen Kenyon. So I went to this conference, and one of the people who taught me biblical studies was a guy from Toronto. Now, most of the North Americans in the British School in Jerusalem were from Toronto. So he was one of the people to interview me there at Seabury Western. He had just come there from, guess where? Toronto. So he said, "Well, what are you interested in?" Well, blah, 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 blah. I saw all these things and such, and talked for a minute. He said, "Well, I'm not supposed to say this to you, but I don't think you belong here." He said, "You want to go to Trinity Toronto, and you want to study with Eugene Fairweather."
Oh.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Well, now the assistant director of the British School in Jerusalem was the chief archaeologist of the Royal Ontario Museum and professor of Near Eastern Studies in the university.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I was unfamiliar with the place.
Yeah.
There it was, and I went there and I talked with Trinity. I came home. I talked to the bishop. He said, "How was Seabury?" I tried to say very nice, but and I said, I really think that I might belong because of all these things in the University of Toronto at Trinity College, faculty of divinity, blah, blah, blah. And I want to study with Eugene Fairweather.
And Fairweather was he an archaeologist? What was his specialty?
He was the Keble Professor of Divinity. He was theologian.
Oh, wow. And Trinity College in Toronto, they're kind of on the English system where universities have colleges, and that was, so to speak, the Catholic-minded college of the Anglican Church in Canada, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it was everything they could do to create an Oxford atmosphere.
Yeah.
That side of the street.
Yep.
I happen to know because I became a fellow, and anyway, but and so the bishop was unimpressed because he said, "I like to get double duty for my money." was very straightforward. And I said, oh, okay. He said, I said, but what does that kind of mean for me? And he said, well, he said, that would mean perhaps going to Seabury, and we would contribute, X percentage or whatever of the fund you need to be there and such. And he said, what does it cost to go to Trinity? I quoted him the number.
Yeah.
Now, this is the 1960s.
Yeah.
But the number was board, room, and tuition for the first year would have been about $700 US.
Yeah.
At Seabury, it would have run to about 2,200.
Yeah. So he could do the math.
The bishop looked at me and in one of his great lines said, I think you'll love Toronto. It's quite a beautiful city. And with that, I was back into that circle of people, some of them that I'd been with in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And studying with Eugene Fairweather, studying theology with Eugene Fairweather was, for most people, a bit like studying with God. And I mean, at that point, he was a member of the, official observer at Vatican II. He had strong Oxford contacts, not the least of which was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who I first met with Eugene.
Would that have been Michael Ramsey? Is that the right?
That would have been.
Yeah. So that's my nomination. If Anglicanism produced a saint in the 20th century, Michael Ramsey is my nominee.
Absolutely. And so it wasn't as hard as it might have seemed to fit in. And this was a very, at least as an institution, a very cosmopolitan. Trinity's a very small college, but its standards for admission are significant. And so it was, it was a really altogether great experience for me, and led to many other things in the rest of my life.
Yeah. Was it a 3-year program in those days, or what?
It was a 3-year program, and it did require, in the theology faculty, if you wanted ordination, it did require a one summer program, which Minnesota required as well.
Yeah.
In those days, that was one of the things.
Yeah.
So I did it. I finished it, managed to get through it in reasonably good shape. And one of my tutors had, in my first year, had gone down to general and become a faculty member for a short while. And he said, I was looking for something to do for a year. And he suggested, why don't you come down here and do the 1-year STM? And he had been
That degree is, for people that don't know, it's a Master's of Sacred Theology, and it's a sort of a once it's a degree that people who already have a master's degree in theology take. So it's a sort of, let's say, a stepping stone to doctoral work, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I went from that 1-year program to a junior position at St. Mark's Cathedral, Minneapolis, under one of the great deans, Harry Hancock, but in 9 months he went home one afternoon and died.
Mm.
And in fact, it was Tuesday of Holy Week.
Mm.
And that made and that's the significant thing. It also, of course, made my position not easy, as you know. And so I ended up, after a 2-year stint there, which would have otherwise been free, I ended up coming back to Toronto, to Trinity College as a fellow, and doing a doctorate. But it was not hard in the sense that it's a place I knew.
Yeah.
And it knew me.
And what did you do your doctorate on?
I did my doctorate on something like Uh, well, I did my doctorate basically in dogmatic and systematic theology. My field, of course, is the Oxford movement.
Why
Remember,
we're talking.
that's right. Remembering that Eugene Fairweather had published a major work on the Oxford movement, but it was selections of work in one of the series, I think it was by Abingdon or someone, and was well known in the field, which also led to my being able to spend a summer in Oxford at what was then Pusey House to do some research. It just led to my meeting Michael Ramsey, led to my all kinds of things.
Just for people who don't know, Pusey House is it's at Oxford. It's not strictly part of Oxford University, but it's a place that was Pusey was one of the leaders of the Oxford movement, and his admirers created a house of studies to preserve his legacy. His library is there, and it has been now low these I mean over 100 years now. It's been a center of spiritual and theological renewal for the church, and I quite admire the current administration. I think they're doing a fabulous job. But what a great opportunity to be able to be there for a while.
At any rate, yeah, and again, it's just it's not just the place; it's the environment and people coming and going, and people of some note in some cases. Um, but it was also for me a place I could go by myself, leave the wife and children at home, go by myself for a part of the summer and finish the doctoral dissertation
Yeah,
and get my hands on some of the original documents,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
and yeah. And so what was it about? Well, so let's segue to the Oxford movement. Obviously, you found this topic of the Oxford movement very engaging. I mean, so who were these people? What did they do? And why is it why was it so compelling to you? And help us to understand the significance of what happened there in the middle of the 19th century.
A lot, a lot happened there, right? Um, I want to preface that by one other statement.
Sure.
When you asked about what caused me to be interested in this, etc., and I wondered for a long time myself, and a long time after I did the degree, a long time after I wrote the book, a long time after what, and I, and I, if I people ask me anymore, I would say that one of the compelling reasons for me was a kind of secondary piece in all of this is that there was within that grouping of people an honest and and intense love of beauty. And I think for me, that's a very strong piece of it. If I look back, it's really not all that long ago that I came to understand it this way. But um, much of Christianity has always been somewhat frightened of the aesthetic, and they have been because of the fear of idolatry.
Yeah. Famously, the sort of iconoclastic, murdering the word, iconoclastic Calvinism, Cromwell and his men, and the Puritans and so forth. There's really almost a dread of images.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and sometimes for some reason.
Yeah.
But um, I grew up in an environment, lovely environment, but I mean, in a church and everything where no one ever spoke the word, even spoke the word, and it wasn't on purpose. It was not a part of the culture, um, and So when I first encountered it as a part of the culture was in the sort of Anglo-Catholic sorts of places that I first found myself in and around and through. And it extended not just to that, it extended to the to an interest in and an understanding of the importance of church architecture and how these play into one another. Uh, and certainly, it is the Anglo-Catholic movement in the mid to later 19th century that pulls all of this together. So that you get all the different, you get the revival of the Gothic revival.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the new
Yeah.
English hymnal, as it were then, but that's the 1890s.
Yeah.
So you get this, the building, the number of buildings built beginning in about the 1850s is quite
Yeah.
astonishing.
Well, you're now describing the DNA of the Cathedral of All Saints here in Albany. The foundation was laid in 1874, lay under straw for 10 years. The cornerstone was set in 1884 on All Saints Day. In 1888, J.P. Morgan gave enough money to get the vaulting over the sanctuary, the choir, and the two side chapels, and the temporary ceiling over the nave so we could get in use the thing. But Bishop Doane rejected the plan of the most well-known architect in the United States, H.A. Richardson,
Oh,
because
really?
he presented a Romanesque building and instead hired this 34-year-old man, Walter Gibson, had never had a building built, but had spent 2 years previously sketching all the great Gothic cathedrals in in Europe. But because Gothic architecture is the right architecture for the the sense of the transcendent beauty of God that the Anglo-Catholic movement was trying to embody. So this is all what you're describing. This is all very much, this is where we come from here at the Cathedral of All Saints, is this path to God through beauty.
Yeah, well, I love to hear it.
Yeah.
Now, for me, another piece of that was was music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coming from a musical family, etc.
Always, and of course, that's been we had the choir was the men and boys choir was founded and singing before the cathedral doors were open.
Right, right. And I had the great good luck for both as a student, a basic, what we call a basic degree student in those days, an MDiv, or no, not an MDiv, STD,
STB, yeah.
and then as a priest assistant to be in St. Thomas's, Toronto, which is not the Healy Willan parish, that's just St. Mary Magdalene's,
Right.
but is well, let's put it this way. It is the parish church of the man who owns Salada Tea.
Yeah, there you go.
So what you need,
Just for those that don't know, Healy Willan is one of the great composers of Anglican church music, and his setting of the Mass is sung very commonly all over the Anglican world today.
so and my great mentor, Eugene Farrell, is an honorary assistant in that parish.
Yeah.
Um, and St. Thomas's is right by the university.
Mhm.
So we had people of real note come through from time to time. That's where I met Trevor Huddleston, you know, and some of these others.
Yeah, the great South African he was one of the South African Cowleys, I think. Is that right?
He was he was invited out of South Africa after about 10 years in their mission church, but he wasn't Cowley. He will come to me in a minute.
Yeah.
Or one of the other British.
Oh no, you're right. He wasn't Cowley. It was something. Society of the. Yeah, I'll think of it.
Sacred Mission.
Might have been Society of the Resurrection or something like that. But anyway,
yeah, CR. He was the CR.
yeah,
Community.
Community of the Resurrection, right? Yeah. Well,
Uh,
but so tell us, help us now understand what happened in Oxford starting in 1833. Something happened. What was it? Who was involved? And why
yeah,
should we care about this?
well, The easy answer to why we should care about it is why should we ever care about the people before us?
Right.
Well, wait a minute, those are my family.
Yeah, they're our family.
Yeah, if they hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here.
Indeed.
And if they hadn't been like they were, I wouldn't be like I am. But well, I have to try to paint with the broadest brush. The early 19th century in England was a time of interesting, we won't call it social unrest exactly, but they had come out of the very sort of almost benign 18th century, which was very much a place to celebrate the nature, the outer doors, the estate life, all of these things that none of us had time to be a part of. But beneath that was, and that's literally the case as well, was the vast majority of the population. So it was not a time when working people were making great strides in any real sense. And the social structures were certainly as rigid as they probably ever had been. Maybe not quite, but at any rate, you weren't going to break in. Even if you got invited, you weren't going to break in. So, and the religiosity of the 18th century had been very toned down. Yes, there was, of course, the great exception to that were the Methodists.
Was Methodism, yeah.
The Methodists, from 1760 on. And they actually, especially Charles, but also John to a lesser extent. Charles was a fellow of one of the rather more advanced church colleges at Oxford. Advanced is not like the middle of the 19th century, but one that still cared about daily prayer, right, and kept daily offices in his chapel. And right. Many of the others had kind of set that aside, so to speak. Right. So so there was a ferment down in there. It was just under the ground a little bit. You're coming into the 19th century, and things begin to change. The monarch changes. The population begins to spread out some. Not quite as much as it will, say, by 1830 or 35, but it is beginning to feather out into the countryside and up into the Midlands. Because this is also, and the most important point, really, to answer towards your question, this is the point of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
And in England, the Industrial Revolution is centered in a way in the Midlands, where there's open land, water power, and a population that can barely make it.
Yeah.
And so these factors all begin to come together in the minds of the persons who are looking at the church that they've inherited and asking what is in fact it doing, literally. Now, it is still, to a degree, the settled parishes of the South. Every village had its parish church, every village had its vicar, etc. But the population base is beginning to move around and is growing in the Midlands. And some are beginning to feel that there really ought to be some responsibility that the church has for this part of England as well. Now, they're not alone, those early Anglo-Catholics. There are people from other church organizations that sense this too. But at the same time, they're looking at a whole new pattern for their ministry, one that we're quite familiar with. But And so they begin to found parishes, but they begin to found them in working class areas, which would never have happened under other circumstances.
Yeah.
And and they brought with them this beginning increasing love of the beautiful, really believing that introducing the beautiful through liturgy and music and the buildings themselves and such will be of aid to bringing people who've not been churched to the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to some degree, they were right. They were too optimistic, but you have to be too optimistic to do this. And so the foundations for the Oxford movement begin not with its liturgical advancement, or even, more with its theological advancement. And people like Newman and Wilberforce and Pusey, who are significant academics. Now they have settled futures in all of that, but they are also anxious to bring this to a new grouping.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, so the three men that are associated with it are John Keble, John Henry Newman, who's just been made, ultimately became a Roman Catholic and has just been made not only a saint but a doctor of the church. And then Edward, we've sort of referred to him before, Edward, and I'm going to murder it, I think, Bouvier, Pusey. How would you pronounce it?
Bouvier.
Bouvier, Pusey, who was the professor of Hebrew.
Yes.
And regarded as being, well, they were all the Supermundi in some ways. They were the three of them. They were remarkable individuals. I believe that Pusey was the only man at Oxford who could read and write German at the time.
True.
And
actually, there was one other, and that's one of the Wilberforces, but never mind.
No. But can you tell us just so help us a little bit with the history? Like, how does it get going, and who are the big?
Okay, I think that you put it correctly by saying they're in Oxford with these guys. There was a Pusey and there was a Newman and there was a Wilberforce. In fact, there were two Wilberforces at any given time.
Wilberforce was he was the son or the grandson of the great Wilberforce the Emancipator? Is that right?
He was the son.
Son.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a priest.
Yes.
Yeah. And ultimately a bishop. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, he was one of the Wilberforce. It'll take me a minute to put them all together.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah. Pusey came from a well-off family.
Yeah.
I think rather landed. I think landed gentry and such. Pusey was a scholar in Hebrew. He was the university professor of Hebrew, and a linguist, and had in fact spent two bits of his time in Germany, coming and going. And he was the eldest of the whole crew. He was introverted and probably not altogether well psychologically. But that did not affect his university life much, and it didn't affect his academic life at all. And he was wealthy. And so he was, for instance, the person who built one of the famous mission churches of the Oxford movement. He just decided that there ought to be a church there in the Midlands for the mill girls. And so he just had one built and wrote the check. But he was quiet, and like I say, kind of introverted. He was a very good scholar. My old mentor, Gene Fairweather, used to say he had visions sometimes when he was writing his book on the Oxford movement. He had visions of Pusey on his way to the university press office with a stack of manuscripts in his hands, and the poor guy from the university press running out trying to get them before they fell on the floor and blew away. Uh, but that, he was, yeah, Wilberforce, the Wilberforces were amongst those that, at least two of them, who moved to Roman Catholicism in the period between 1845 and 1850s. Robert Isaac, who was probably the most creative theological writer of the group. Robert Isaac was, I'm trying to remember whether it was both he and one of his brothers became Roman Catholics. And I think he was the one who died in Rome, living in Rome in about 1857, I believe. Other Wilberforces continued on in the Church of England. One of them became the Bishop of not of Oxford, maybe finally of Oxford, but of Manchester. No, not Manchester, down south of there. Anyway, and that was Samuel, I think.
Yeah.
One became known as Soapy Sam.
Yeah.
The categorizing them as a group is not simple, because people came and went from the grouping. But usually the group is defined as those 6 persons who came together in 1833 and produced the first tracts for the Times.
Yeah. It begins with John Keble, who's the professor of poetry, gives a sermon, the famous Assize sermon,
July
of 1833.
Ah.
It's in response to the Parliament reducing the number of bishops in Ireland,
Yes.
which probably made a lot of sense, but they didn't think that they needed to consult the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Synod of the Church to do that.
Right.
And causes Keble to preach a sermon. And if I get it, you can tell me if I'm not getting it. If I get the gist of the sermon is, look, the church is not a department of the state. The church is the body of Christ, and its ministers are not functionaries of the British civil service. They're apostolic men. They're descendants of the apostles that are called to holiness themselves, so that they might call God's people to holiness.
Right. Exactly. It was national apostasy.
Yeah, that was the name of the sermon, National Apostasy.
Right.
And Newman felt that the movement started with that. And then they start writing the tracts. And my understanding is that Newman writes most of the tracts, although
after a certain point.
Yeah.
They say, if you go by the numbers of the tracts, somewhere after 18, 19, I can't remember now. I can have that information by tomorrow. The tracts, the big thing about the tracts, pardon me for what I'm about to say, the attraction was that they were distributed free to everybody they could get into somebody's hand, in much of England, at least the first. And
they had an immense circulation for the time.
Oh, yes.
Partially, one of the things I think that may have helped it was that Keble had written a book of poems called The Christian Year, which some scholars reckon was in 1 in 3 British homes at that time. So
the most read book of poetry in England in the 19th century.
Yeah. So he was. Anyway, there was these were prominent people, and people took them seriously, and the tracts were widely. Just a little interesting side note. I don't know if you will agree with this, but I think they got the idea for the tracts from Bishop Hobart, who was an Episcopal bishop here in New York, when he came and visited Oxford.
I will leave that to you.
Okay.
You can write.
I think I can make that case. Newman wrote 3 articles about Hobart, so I think there's some documentary evidence for them.
Yeah. That's right, he did. Yeah. And of course, Newman, becomes a national treasure.
Yeah.
And I think that was but he never, the person with whom he never lost any relationship with was Richard Church. Now, and Church became Dean of St. Paul's, and they he was. I'm trying to think. The Church was writing about Newman when Newman died.
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
80s.
What would you say if you could summarize the message of the tracks? What were the tracks trying to accomplish?
I think that's a hard question to answer because they really were individual efforts,
Yep.
and so some people may have been trying to accomplish things that others
Right.
weren't
Right.
interested in. Now, I think what they were really trying to accomplish was a national revival.
Yeah.
That religion, and you can see this in American history too, that religiosity in the 18th century had become very settled.
Yeah.
It was very quiet
Right.
in that sense. That's what made the big thing for the
And,
message.
and I would say, let's see if you agree with this or disagree with this, which is that, and Newman talks about this after he becomes a Roman Catholic and in his speech when he accepts the cardinal's hat, that he had been fighting all his life against indifferentism, he called it, or he called it liberalism, which wouldn't mean quite what we would mean today with the word liberal. But what he meant was a kind of indifference to fundamental Christian doctrines. Maybe Jesus is the Son of God, maybe he isn't. Well, that kind of indifferentism would be something that Newman would say that's you've got to push back against that spirit. You've got to recenter the church on a confession in Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of the Father, born of Mary, as he comes to us clothed in the scriptures.
Mm. No, I agree. I mean, uh, but I think the other thing to remember about Newman, uh, though I speak it not quietly, but anyway, was that he really was a loner.
Mm,
I mean, even at the height of the movement, Newman could not be thought of as the leader. And of course, he is one of the first to bow out. So
yeah, yeah,
he's not alone, but so yeah. I mean, Richard Church referred to him as a national treasure.
yeah,
Was a national treasure,
yeah,
but I'm not so sure that that his treasureness really begins in the 1830s.
yeah.
I think it begins in the 1840s when he leaves and becomes a Roman Catholic, um, and and that frees him. That sounds like a crazy thing to say about going into Roman Catholicism in the 19th century, but
But he's not trying to worry about offending the Bishop of Oxford anymore. He's
that's right. That's right. Because the other side of Newman is he never leaves. He is an Englishman, an educator of Englishmen,
yeah.
and
I've been listening to I don't know if you know who Robert Barron is, but he's a Roman Catholic bishop. He's kind of the contemporary Fulton Sheen, and
yeah,
he's very good, I think. He's quite a fan of Newman and speaks and writes about Newman. And this is a commonplace in his speaking about Newman. He says, you have to remember that Newman was an Englishman.
right.
And he emphasizes this. This is a different mentality. It's a different cast of mind than the European cast of mind.
This is true, and he was not terribly popular amongst the Romans.
No, I know. I mean, when he converts, um, when he converts, and we probably should talk about track 90, which was what caused him to convert. But when he converts, he's got the he's fielding sort of hostility from the church, from England, from the Church of England, and from English patriots who see his conversion to Rome as a kind of not only a religious thing, but a kind of a it has a kind of political overtone to it of treason. And then the Roman Catholics are supremely suspicious of him
Mhm.
because who is this Protestant minister who's come over to us?
And they want nothing to do with it, actually.
No. And I think there was a tremendous effort to keep Pope Leo the 13th from is it Leo the 13th? Is that's right, isn't it? Who made him a cardinal? Uh, I think that people really tried to keep Leo the 13th from making him a cardinal. So he
Yeah,
he, he
yeah.
kind of got it from he kind of got it from both sides. He kind of got it from both sides.
And they're not altogether undeserved. Um, no, seriously. I mean, in a sense that he he had a very deep but very distinctive piety.
Yeah.
And when you look at the oh, what's the name of the place out in about 10 miles out of Oxford, where we found
Cowley.
a
Oh
cow.
no. No,
No,
it wasn't Cowley. Where he went kind of had his little proto monastery.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. And you
Eddington or something like I can't remember.
know, I will come to me, but I'll call you about 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Have you been out there? It's
No.
very modest. I mean, you know, they had about, it was built on a kind of monastic grid. As to say, a chapel at one side, and places to live on two sides, and an entranceway and such on the fourth side. Uh, but it was very modest. It was, and there was only, I believe, places for like a half a dozen people to live in it. It's the place from which they had to carry Pusey on the day that Newman poped and all of that. And so it has a history. But it is the place that Newman built.
Little more.
Little more, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah, he built it. And he didn't overbuild, having been there myself. You know, and I think that was the sign to everybody that he really is leaving.
Yeah.
You know, because he literally left.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't return for a long time.
Right.
Um,
It's all, yeah, there's so much to talk about. One of the things that's fascinating to me is Newman, who's made a saint by the Roman Catholic Church, and now a doctor of the church, which is a very distinguished title. Only 38 uh, persons, men and women, have been made doctors of the church. Um, I read a secular historian of Victorian England, um, not a religious person, just a sort of a secular, just a historian writing from a secular point of view, but saying that, you know, Newman was hands down the most brilliant mind in Victorian England in
oh,
his,
oh yeah, yeah.
in his estimation. And his work is enjoying a great renaissance in our time. Um, but Newman thought that Keble was the holy one. He thought Keble was the saint, the sort of the saint amongst them was really Keble. You know, I mean, Pusey has no small claim to sanctity himself, I think. I mean, there's a story about him that during a cholera epidemic in London, when everybody is fleeing London, he leaves his post in Oxford and goes and makes himself into the curate of one of his students in the slums of Oxford, slums of London, and you know, takes care of people, does nursing of people who have had cholera, and visits the homes and buries the dead. And so a very committed bunch, but they all looked up to the professor of poetry who retired from Oxford and was a country parson for most of his life.
Yeah, in his father's parish, I believe.
Yeah, his father's parish. Yeah,
It was the family job.
and that's the family job, right? Yeah,
I think the other thing to realize, or to that we can always take away from this, is that the really astonishing thing, at least to me, as somebody who spent some time working with this stuff, um, was what the next generation, inspired by that first generation, was able to accomplish in terms of moving back into the parochial life of the English church. That was really I mean,
What they were able to accomplish by moving back into the parochial life of the English church,
right.
the second generation. So the people that were these would be, some of the students that these three men had at Oxford. And in those days, the way that you became a priest was that uh, you went to one of the great universities. You went to Oxford or Cambridge, and that was your preparation for holy orders. There might have been some additional study, but there weren't really seminaries as such. I think some of the great English seminaries really are post the Oxford movement, if that's correct. And that's one of the things. That's part of the influence we have here at the cathedral. And this will be a name that will mean something to you. We have here at the Cathedral of All Saints a Society of Edward King.
Oh
Uh,
my, yeah, good for you.
yeah,
Oh, the good Edward King is one of the great bishops. He really
he really was. And but he's a sort of a second generation man, maybe even a third generation man.
third. Yeah,
Third, would you say? Yeah.
yeah,
And but one of the things that he did was found one of the great houses of preparation and study for priests. Rowan Williams says that Bishop Edward King, did more to transform the Church of England than any Archbishop of Canterbury by
yeah,
virtue of the priests that he formed. So here's the cascading effect of this Oxford movement.
exactly. And in a way, it bespeaks the integrity of the movement.
Integrity of the movement. Say more about that.
Well, as to say that it's very easy with a group like that of very distinct personalities, etc., to spend most of your time trying to figure out how they related to one another. But then the reality is not always well. But uh, each one of them contributed significantly to some kind of developing ministry in mid-Victorian times. I mean, if you look at the number of parishes founded by these people, not just in general, but these people who stipulated what kind of parishes they would be. That is to say, they would be places with celibate clergy very often. They would be places with all Eucharistic centrality. There would be, etc., etc. But they would also be places where the priests were devoted to being in the streets.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was amazing. If you think of what the Church of England was like in 1800, to see what it was like in 1865,
Yeah.
when they really had, the second generation had really gotten up and going. And by 1880, they have taken over a great number of senior academic appointments. I mean, this is really quite amazing in a church that hasn't got a long history of change.
Yeah.
So I think that also, little as it was when it started, the reintroduction of religious orders, which gave another boost to external ministry.
Yeah. There had been no religious orders since the Reformation.
Right.
And so Pusey is very involved in this, is founding the first sisterhood, I think, since the Reformation. And then the Cowley Fathers, so-called Society of St. John the Evangelist, so-called Cowley Fathers, because their house was in Cowley, which is a suburb of Oxford. They came. There were Franciscans, I think, and the Community of the Resurrection. So and then numerous sisterhoods were formed during
Right.
the latter part of the 19th century, and that show that's so popular called called The Midwife. I mean, they're at least accurate in that, uh, this was really powerful what these women were doing.
No, absolutely. And by the way, and we shouldn't, be shy to say, and what they were doing because they were needed to do it.
Yeah,
And the social distinctions that they quote overcame or just forgot about,
yeah,
were manifold. This wasn't what women did, not that very well got by then.
No, I think it's hard for us to understand the crossing of, I mean, the crossing of social divides, which were, you know, almost like iron fences. I mean, this was really breathtaking in the social milieu of the day. Uh,
Hmm.
the Regius Professor of Hebrew at Oxford University going to a tenement flat in the middle of a cholera epidemic and you know cleaning up the vomit and mess of somebody who's dying of cholera. Just that, you know, to mix with the lower classes in any way would have been
No,
scandal. You
yes,
know?
you don't do that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it was heroic, it was noble, it was a real prophetic Christ. These were prophetic Christian acts in a very stratified society. I think it was.
And I'm glad you put it that way, because the breaking down of that stratification, which, by the way, some would argue has never broken down,
Yeah.
but the breaking down of that stratification uh, would have been very different and not even and even more difficult without what those people in those orders and others with them
Yeah.
did.
Who would you say who are some of the figures in the second generation? So we've got Keble and Pusey and Newman and Williams and the Wilberforces in the first generation. Who are some of the people in the second generation that are outstanding to you?
Hmm. That would take me a while to think about. I'm so geared in my brain to the first generation that can I have a day or what?
Yeah, well, we're going to continue this conversation tomorrow. Uh, what do you think it was? But let's maybe end with this today. What do you think it was? So, you know, they're writing the tracks for the Times. Um, I think broadly speaking, I think that, you know, your name of your book is Incarnation and Grace, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about your book.
Yes. Hmm.
Um, but I think that those are two themes that they were certainly striking. One theme was the recentering the church on the incarnation of Jesus Christ and lifting up the sacramental life of the church as an encounter with the incarnate Lord, crucified, risen from the dead, ascended, transfigured, uh, encountering in some way his glorified humanity and being revived ourselves, revivified, reformed uh, by uh, by that. Um, Certainly, they're calling the clergy to out of a kind of lassitude and calling them a recalling them to a kind of what would I say a, a noble adventure, a life of sacrifice, service, and a quest for holiness, so they can, with authenticity, call God's people to holiness. Calling the clergy to embrace their profession, embrace their vocation, and embrace their ordination vows. And people responded to it. Um,
Ah, amazing.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it was but it was a call to adventure in some way, I think, that you know, um,
I think that's a really good point, really good way to say it, a call to adventure, because no one had ever been alive to see this. In other words, the 18th century, after all, had 100 years. And in that 100 years, they, they learned to farm well. they, but it was a very, very quiet and settled time. And then the 19th century kind of caught up with them, by biting them on the hind quarter as the world began to change. And that's part of that could even be construed to say that such things as the American Revolution.
yeah,
And the movement of, 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 of people out of Britain but people with some religiosity taking this religiosity to other places. My wife just went by the door on the way upstairs, and my wife, family, good example. My wife is Jamaican.
Yeah.
So these are okay. I was the rector of Christ Oyster Bay for 15 years before I got into this other stuff, and that was an SPG parish founded in 1705.
Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, which was one of the great missionary societies. But and that
And
was more the Catholic minded missionary society, I think.
that they became that. Now in 1705, there were no Catholic
Right.
minded Anglicans, but yes, and that's not a whole line of story. But the reality is that as some of these people moved out in the 19th century as well, uh, the so to speak face of Anglicanism began slowly but surely to change.
Yeah.
And when we look at where the predominant number of people of Anglicanism are to be found, they're to be found in Africa.
Right.
There's some in Asia.
Yeah.
And in India.
Yeah.
And it is different.
It's an interesting thing to me. If you Google Oxford movement,
Yeah.
you know, if you Google Oxford movement, you will get all these entries from India because because Indian Anglicans are keenly to this day, keenly very, very interested in the Oxford movement. And you'll get all these lectures by priests and professors at Indian Anglican theological colleges on the Oxford movement. It's interesting to me when that comes up first before Pusey House or anything or anything else comes up.
Oh, well, there's lots of Indians. Yeah, so, yes, and that brings up the name of Daniel Wilson, who was the first bishop, right, into India. 1815, the CMS, the beginning of the Church Missionary Society. Um, yeah, Daniel Wilson.
Okay.
So but so the English finally got the idea that maybe they should, go out someplace and maybe evangelize.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that stands out in the minds of people beyond our own, as it were, is that whether it was intended or not, the Oxford movement gave birth to a whole new dynamic for urban ministries, and that was to have a profound effect in England. It maybe not as identified as some other movements, but you go through. It doesn't matter where you go through in England anymore. You will see evidences of this. And the social ministries that were founded out of those parishes were tremendous, and especially the ones in East London, which was not a very
Right.
good place for
Right.
law. And to this day, that influence is there. So I think anyway, so it goes.
So it goes. Well, we've been talking about an hour today, and we're gonna this is gonna be part one of a two-part conversation. So we'll pick it up again where we leave off today. But I think maybe we can start next time with talking a little bit about some of these second generation figures and what they were doing, and then perhaps get into your book about the theology of the Oxford movement, which I found so fascinating about the emphasis on both incarnation and grace, which I think are messages we still need to hear today.
Oh,
Father, thank you so much for this. We're looking forward to speaking to you again
yes,
in, in,
2 days.
in a short, yeah, 2 days. That's right.
Okay.
All righty.
My voice back. All right.
All righty. God bless.
Thank
See
you.
you,
Yeah,
see you soon.
see you soon.